Today we got History Matters and we got Why Did South Africa Give Up Its Nukes? Let's check it out, man.
Africa is the only nation in history to unilaterally disarm its own nuclear weapons. Others have relinquished theirs, like Ukraine did, but those were Soviet weapons they inherited and not their own home-developed ones. Given that no other nation has ever developed such powerful weapons and then just decided they didn't want them anymore,
everyone should do this.
Why did South Africa give up its nukes? So first of all, a bit of background on South Africa. By the 1970s, South Africa's global position was complicated. The country was run by its white minority and its government introduced a social system known as apartheid, which means separation. This system restricted the black majority's freedoms in the country. These policies towards the black majority in South Africa meant that its relations with its neighbouring countries weren't exactly great, with the sole exception of Rhodesia, obviously. As for its broader international relations, these changed over time. Its relationship with the USSR and the communist world was always terrible. Whereas its relations with the USA and the UK were pretty good in the 1960s, but as time...
It's actually funny when History Matters does this. You know when they do like the little letters, stuff like the signpost right here? Imagine if they actually sent to the other, like, you know, world leaders these messages by, like, you know, what letters or whatever. Just, you suck, bro.
Went on, they soured. Early on, the US also had laws which enforced segregation, but when these laws were repealed, it became increasingly less acceptable to maintain good diplomatic relations with South Africa. And by the 1970s, South Africa was largely isolated. Things were made worse when Portugal, who had been covertly supportive of South Africa, withdrew from its African colonies, leaving it even more isolated.
Well, never
and
knew
it was this isolation which led to South Africa developing its own nuclear weapons, although it took a long time for the government to come to this conclusion. Its thinking was that if its survival were to be threatened, then none in the international community would help it. Thus, the only surefire way of guaranteeing that the current South Africa would see tomorrow was to build a nuclear arsenal, the mere existence of which would deter aggressors. So, South Africa had had its own nuclear program since 1948, but this was devoted to nuclear energy and making economic use of the country's abundant uranium deposits. In 1965, with the help of the USA, it commissioned its first nuclear reactor. And in 1970, Prime Minister...
You know what? It's actually crazy when you think about it, because, like, all these countries, they have to develop nukes in order to defend itself, right? It's like, if one country's got nukes and another country don't have nukes, the country with nukes technically is a strong country, right? Because it has nukes. But then, like, let's say they all get nukes, right? Because I'm pretty sure, like, Russia and Ukraine, they both have nukes, right? Russia definitely has nukes. Ukraine most likely has nukes. But, like, Russia, it didn't really protect Ukraine. Because even though you have the nukes, there's no way you can use the nukes because it's just going to be fucked. So it's kind of just like a museum. It's kind of just like there. You know what I mean? You may as well, like, a country may as well just make one nuke and just save the budget for the actual military. Because they're most likely never going to need it. Because, you know, let's say Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine fired nukes at Russia. They would know that Russia will fire nukes at them and everyone's fucked. Right? So... You know, South Africa ain't running, giving up his news. Just keep one.
Minister John Vorster authorised the creation of a uranium enrichment facility. Although he stressed that this would only be for peaceful purposes, exactly 0 people believed him. In the late 1970s, events to the north in Angola changed government policy. You see, Angola was undergoing a civil war, which had seen the intervention of Cuban forces, which were in turn backed by the USSR. South Africa saw this as a direct threat to its very existence. And so this was when Prime Minister Peter Botha pushed to develop nuclear weapons. South Africa's first nuclear weapon was finished in November 1979. So by 1989, South Africa had 7 nuclear bombs of about the same sophistication and yield as the bomb dropped in Hiroshima. An election in the same year saw Frederick de Klerk elected as president, and his priorities were to end South Africa's international isolation, which would be done via internal reforms. To be blunt, apartheid's days were numbered, and it was his job to make sure the transition away from it wasn't too civil war-y. This transition would then bring South Africa back into the international community, which was more important now that the Cold War was over. You see, prior to this, the West could tolerate apartheid South Africa because it was fiercely anti-communist, but now the Warsaw Pact was dead, the leverage was gone. There was also one other reason. You see, with tensions running high, the white minority was worried about what the next majority-chosen government would look like. To simplify further, the white minority didn't trust a black government.
Basically, they kind of just got scared, right? They needed the protection. They made the nukes, right? And then they just gave them up because, you know, everything settled out.
With nuclear weapons, and so got rid of them. With this inevitable change coming, de Klerk felt that rehabilitating South Africa would be easier if its nuclear weapon program was ended. And in 1990, he did just that, and within a year, all 7 weapons had been decommissioned. 2 years later, he announced to the world that South Africa had previously had nuclear weapons, but had also gotten rid of them. South Africa had just made history.
Everyone should follow South Africa's lead and just get rid of their nukes. You know, there will be a safer place. But that is never, ever, ever going to happen. But really good video from Mention Matters. Enjoy that one. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it too. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.